Chapter 1. The invitation. Brandon Greer stared at the cream-colored envelope like it had just landed from another planet. It sat on his kitchen counter, elegant and smug, with gold lettering that practically screamed "You're invited." He flipped it over, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage. Nope, still there, still real. He tore it open, scanning the words with mild curiosity that quickly turned into a grin. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of..." Brandon chuckled. Well, I'll be damned. It wasn't the wedding itself that amused him. It was the names. Two of his old college friends, finally tying the knot after years of on-again, off-again drama that made reality TV look tame. He hadn't seen most of that crowd in nearly a decade. The thought of catching up sounded nice, comfortable, like slipping into an old hoodie that still fit. He tossed the envelope onto the counter and reached for his coffee mug. The kitchen smelled faintly of roasted beans and last night's garlic bread, a reminder that his culinary skills peaked at toast plus something. He took a sip, leaning against the counter, and let the idea settle. A wedding weekend, old friends, good food, maybe even a decent open bar, and no dates. Brandon smirked at that last thought. He'd given up on the dating scene months ago, after one too many evenings spent listening to strangers dissect their exes over overpriced cocktails. It was like being a therapist, except he had to pay for the privilege. He'd decided he'd rather spend his money on steak and bourbon with people who didn't make him question his life choices. His phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Ryan, his best friend and unofficial life coach. "Ryan, got your invite yet? Don't bail, man. It's gonna be epic." Brandon typed back, already RSVP'd. "Don't worry, I'll bring my sparkling personality." Ryan's reply came fast. "Good. Maybe you'll meet someone. Or at least remember how to dance without looking like a malfunctioning robot." Brandon snorted. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." He set the phone down and wandered into the living room, coffee in hand. The November sunlight slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across the hardwood floor. His place was neat, minimalistic, just the way he liked it. No clutter, no drama, no reminders of college except for a single photo tucked into a bookshelf. A group shot from sophomore year, all grins and bad haircuts. He didn't look at it often. Too many ghosts in that picture. Brandon sank onto the couch, stretching his legs out. His mind drifted, uninvited, to a name he hadn't spoken in years. Katy Denton. He blinked, surprised at how easily it surfaced. He hadn't thought about her in, 8, 9 years? Back then, she was all bright eyes and quick laughter, the kind of woman who could make a dull lecture feel like a comedy show. They weren't in the same program. She was business management, he was knee-deep in computer science, but they'd crossed paths enough to matter. For a while, he thought they might have something. And they did, sort of, until Jeff happened. Brandon's jaw tightened, just a fraction. He wasn't bitter, not anymore. He'd walked away without fireworks, without drama, just done. It was the cleanest break he'd ever made, and maybe the smartest. Still, the memory lingered like a faint scar. Not painful, just there. He shook it off and grabbed his laptop from the coffee table. Time to make reservations before the good hotels were gone. He pulled up the wedding details, scanning the itinerary. Welcome dinner Friday, ceremony Saturday, brunch Sunday. A full weekend of nostalgia. As he clicked through hotel options, Ryan called. Brandon answered on speaker. "Tell me you're booking something decent," Ryan said without preamble. "None of that budget motel crap." Brandon smirked. "Relax. I'm looking at a place with actual sheets and everything." "Good. You deserve luxury. Or at least a bed that doesn't smell like despair." Brandon laughed. "You're oddly invested in my accommodations. I'm invested in your social life, man. You've been hiding out like a hermit. This wedding? Perfect chance to shake off the cobwebs." Brandon rolled his eyes, even though Ryan couldn't see it. "I'm going to see friends, not audition for The Bachelor." "Aha, keep telling yourself that. Just don't chicken out when the slow songs start." Brandon ended the call with a grin, shaking his head. Ryan meant well, even if his pep talk sounded like bad motivational posters. He finished booking the hotel and closed the laptop. The weekend was set. No expectations, no pressure. Just a chance to reconnect and maybe laugh about old times. Brandon leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Funny how life worked. You spend years moving forward, building walls, and then one envelope shows up and cracks a window open to the past. He didn't know who else would be there. Didn't care, really. At least, that's what he told himself. Chapter 2. Katy's RSVP. Katy Denton stared at the email on her laptop, the subject line glowing like a neon sign. "You're invited." She clicked it open, and the names at the top made her laugh out loud. "Finally," she muttered, leaning back in her chair. Took them long enough. The wedding invitation was for two of her closest college friends, the couple everyone thought would either kill each other or get married. Apparently, they'd chosen matrimony over homicide. Good for them. She scrolled through the details. Weekend event, welcome dinner Friday, ceremony Saturday, brunch Sunday. A full itinerary of nostalgia. Katy smiled, already picturing the laughter, the bad dancing, the inevitable stories that started with "remember when?" Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend. "Claire. Claire. You going?" Please tell me you're going. You need this. Katy typed back, of course I'm going. Why wouldn't I? Claire's reply was instant. Because you hate weddings, and small talk, and people asking why you're single. Katy grinned. I don't hate weddings. I hate bad weddings. This one will be fun. Claire. Translation. You're going alone, aren't you? Katy hesitated, then typed, yep. Solo mission. Claire bold. I like it. Just promise me you won't spend the whole time hiding behind the dessert table. Katy laughed, tossing her phone onto the desk. Claire wasn't wrong. She had a habit of retreating to the cheesecake when conversations turned awkward. But this time felt different. She wasn't the same girl who left college with a head full of regrets and a heart full of confusion. She opened her calendar and blocked off the weekend. As she did, her mind wandered, uninvited, to a name she hadn't spoken in years. Brandon Greer. The memory hit like a soft tap on the shoulder. She saw him as he was back then. Tall, quiet, with a smile that could melt steel if he ever bothered to use it. They'd met freshman year, shared a few laughs, even a few dates. And then, Jeff happened. Katy's stomach tightened. She hated thinking about that part. Not because Brandon was cruel, he wasn't. He was calm, steady, the kind of guy who didn't play games. Which made it worse when she realized, far too late, that she'd been playing without even knowing it. She remembered the night everything fell apart. She'd blown off dinner with Brandon to help Jeff with something trivial. What was it? A broken printer? A group project? It didn't matter. What mattered was the look on Brandon's face when she finally caught up to him days later. Not angry, not hurt, just done. She tried to explain, fumbling for words that sounded hollow even to her own ears. Jeff was just a friend. Brandon didn't argue. He didn't accuse. He simply said, I'm not angry, Katy. I'm just finished fighting for scraps of attention after Jeff gets his fill. Those words had carved themselves into her memory like stone. At the time, she thought he was being dramatic. Now, she knew better. The epiphany came months later, when Jeff got a new girlfriend and dropped Katy like yesterday's news. She defended him, sacrificed a relationship for him, and in the end, he tossed her aside because his girlfriend didn't want him hanging out with an ex. The irony was brutal. That was the day Katy realized Brandon had been right all along. She hadn't cheated physically, but emotionally, she'd been guilty as hell. It was a hard lesson, but she learned it. Boundaries became her religion, respect, her mantra. She built a life that didn't revolve around anyone else's drama. And she was proud of that. Katy shook off the memory and clicked RSVP. Yes. She even added a note. Looking forward to celebrating with you. She meant it. She was ready to see old friends, laugh about the past, and prove, to herself if no one else, that she wasn't that girl anymore. Her phone buzzed again. Claire, of course. Claire. So, any chance Brandon will be there? Katy stared at the screen, her pulse skipping for reasons she didn't care to examine. She typed back, no idea. And it doesn't matter. Claire's reply was a single emoji. Eyes. Katy rolled her eyes, smiling despite herself. It doesn't matter, she whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it true. But deep down, a tiny voice whispered back, what if it does? Chapter 3. Arrival day. Brandon Greer hated hotel lobbies. Too much noise, too many suitcases, and way too many people pretending they weren't judging each other's outfits. He adjusted the strap of his overnight bag and scanned the room for the check-in desk. A line snaked across the polished floor like a bored python. Great, he muttered. Nothing says, relaxing weekend, like standing in line behind a guy arguing about pillow firmness. He joined the queue, pulling out his phone to kill time. Ryan had already texted 3 times this morning. Ryan, you there yet? Don't forget to smile. Women love a guy who looks approachable. Brandon typed back, pretty sure women also love a guy who doesn't look like he's reading a script from a dating app. Ryan's reply was instant. Just don't scowl. You have a resting I hate humanity face. Brandon smirked, sliding the phone into his pocket. He didn't hate humanity. He just preferred it in small doses, preferably with barbecue and beer. The line moved slowly. He glanced around, spotting familiar faces from college. A few nods, a couple of quick hellos. It was strange, seeing people who used to be part of his daily life now aged into careers and mortgages. Everyone looked older, wiser, or at least better at hiding chaos behind tailored suits. Finally, his turn came. He checked in, grabbed his keycard, and headed toward the elevators. The hotel was nice, modern, sleek, with enough chrome and glass to make him feel underdressed. He stepped into the elevator, pressed his floor, and leaned against the wall. 2 floors up, the doors slid open, and in walked Trouble. Katy Denton. Brandon froze, every muscle locking like someone hit pause on his life. She looked different. Still Katy, but sharper somehow. Her hair was longer, swept into a low ponytail that made her look effortlessly polished. A navy dress hugged her curves without screaming for attention. And those eyes, still the same warm brown, but steadier, like they'd seen storms and learned how to stand through them. She didn't notice him at first, juggling a tote bag and a rolling suitcase. Then her gaze lifted, and the world tilted. Brandon. Her voice was soft, surprised. like she wasn't sure if she was seeing a ghost or a glitch in the matrix. He swallowed, forcing his brain to reboot. Katy. One word. That's all he managed. Brilliant. She smiled, hesitant but real. Wow. It's been, what, 10 years? Close enough, he said, stepping back to give her space. The elevator doors slid shut, trapping them in a chrome box of awkward nostalgia. How have you been? She asked, adjusting her bag. Her tone was casual, but her eyes flickered with something else. Curiosity. Regret. He couldn't tell. Good, Brandon said. You? Good, she echoed, then laughed softly. Well, that was riveting. He chuckled despite himself. Sorry. I'm better at small talk when there's barbecue involved. Noted, she said, smiling wider now. Maybe we'll find some at the reception. The elevator dinged. His floor. He stepped out, turning back briefly. See you around, Katy. Yeah, she said, her voice following him like a thread. See you. Brandon walked down the hall, keycard in hand, heart thudding like he'd just run a marathon. He wasn't sure what rattled him more, the fact that she looked incredible, or the fact that seeing her didn't hurt anymore. Not like it used to, but it didn't feel neutral either. Katy dropped her bags onto the bed and exhaled. The room was bright, airy, with a view of the city skyline. She should have been admiring it, but her mind was stuck in that elevator. Brandon Greer. She hadn't expected him to be here. She hadn't expected him to look like that. Older, yes, but in the best way. Broader shoulders, sharper jawline, and that calm energy she remembered. Except now it carried a weight, like he'd learned how to hold his ground and never apologize for it. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. Seeing him had stirred something she thought was long buried. Not guilt, she'd made peace with that years ago. Something else. Something that whispered, what if? Her phone buzzed. Claire, of course. Claire. Well, is he there? Katy typed back, yes. Saw him in the elevator. Claire. And? Katy stared at the screen, then wrote, and he looks good. Really good. Claire's reply was a string of heart eye emojis followed by, girl, this is your rom-com moment. Don't blow it. Katy laughed, tossing the phone aside. Rom-com moment? Please. Life wasn't a movie. There were no perfectly timed rainstorms or grand gestures. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that fate had just pulled up a chair and said, let's play. Chapter 4. The welcome dinner. Brandon adjusted his collar for the third time and told himself to stop fussing. It was just a dinner, not a job interview. Still, the mirror wasn't helping. His tie looked fine. His shirt looked fine. He looked fine. Fine is good, he muttered, grabbing his jacket. Fine doesn't start rumors. The hotel ballroom was buzzing when he arrived. Warm light spilled across round tables draped in ivory linens. Waiters floated by with trays of champagne, and laughter rippled through the crowd like a familiar song. Brandon spotted a few old friends near the bar and headed over, weaving through clusters of people swapping stories about careers, kids, and mortgages. Brandon. Ryan's voice boomed above the chatter. He clapped Brandon on the shoulder like they hadn't seen each other in years, which technically they hadn't. Man, look at you. Still rocking the responsible adult vibe. Brandon smirked. And you're still rocking the human megaphone vibe. Ryan grinned, handing him a drink. You're welcome. So, ready for the nostalgia trip? Ready as I'll ever be, Brandon said, scanning the room. He recognized faces, some vaguely, some vividly. It was surreal, like flipping through an old yearbook that had come to life. Then he saw her. Katy stood near the far end of the room, laughing at something a friend said. The sound carried across the space, warm and easy, like it used to. She wore a simple black dress that managed to look both elegant and effortless. Brandon felt his pulse kick up a notch, and he hated that it did. Ryan followed his gaze and smirked. Well, well, blast from the past. Brandon shot him a look. Don't start. Not starting. Just observing, Ryan said, sipping his drink. You gonna say hi? Brandon hesitated. He wasn't sure what he'd say. Hey, remember when I walked out of your life without a fight? Good times. Yeah, that would go over great. Before he could decide, Katy turned, and their eyes met. For a split second, the room faded. Just her. Just him. And a decade of silence humming between them. Then she smiled, small but genuine, and started walking his way. Brandon's brain scrambled for words. Something casual. Something cool. Something that didn't sound like he'd rehearsed it in the mirror. Brandon, she said when she reached him, her voice warm with surprise. Twice in one day. I'm starting to think you're following me. He managed to smile. Elevators, dinner, I'm sensing a pattern. She laughed, and it hit him like a memory. How easily she used to laugh. How it made everything feel lighter. Ryan, of course, jumped in. Katy Denton. Wow, you look amazing. Thanks, Ryan, she said, shaking his hand. You too. Brandon cleared his throat. So, how've you been? Good, she said, then tilted her head. You? Good, he echoed, and immediately regretted sounding like a broken record. He tried again. You're still in business management? Sort of, she said. I run my own consulting firm now. Keeps me busy. Impressive, Brandon said, and meant it. She'd always had drive. Seeing her now, confident and composed, made him wonder what else had changed. Before he could ask, a voice cut through the hum of conversation. Katy. Brandon stiffened. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. The tone was too familiar, too loud. Jeff. Katy's smile faltered as Jeff strode over, all swagger and cologne. He looked older but not wiser, like someone who still thought charm was a personality. Wow, Jeff said, sliding an arm around Katy's shoulders like he owned the space. Look at you, gorgeous as ever. Brandon felt something cold settle in his chest. He didn't say a word. Didn't need to. The old pattern was unfolding right in front of him. Katy stepped back, subtly shrugging off Jeff's arm. Jeff. Hi. Jeff grinned. That's all I get after 10 years? Pretty sure that's all you deserve, she said lightly, but Brandon caught the edge in her tone. Jeff laughed, oblivious. Come on, let's catch up. I've got stories. Brandon didn't wait for the invitation. He set his drink down and excused himself, heading toward the terrace. He wasn't angry, just done. Again. Brandon leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool night air. Inside, laughter and music spilled through the open doors, but out here, it was quiet. He stared at the city lights, trying to shake the déjà vu. He'd promised himself this weekend would be drama-free. No old wounds, no pointless tension. And yet, here he was watching history try to repeat itself. Behind him, the door opened. Footsteps. Then a voice, low, sharp, and laced with venom. Jeff, we are not friends. Brandon froze. Katy's voice. He turned slightly, just enough to see her standing near the doorway, facing Jeff. Her posture was steel, her tone lethal. You don't get to waltz in here and act like nothing happened, she said, her words slicing through the night. You blew up my life once. That was enough. Jeff blinked, genuinely shocked. Katy, come on. No, she said, cutting him off. Stay out of my life. She walked away, heels clicking like punctuation marks, leaving Jeff standing there with his ego in pieces. Brandon didn't move, didn't speak, but for the first time all night he felt something shift. Maybe history wasn't repeating itself after all. Chapter 5. Old patterns, new sparks. Katy Denton slammed her hotel room door harder than necessary and immediately winced. Great. Now she sounded like a teenager throwing a tantrum. She kicked off her heels and paced the carpet, her pulse still hammering from the confrontation. Jeff. Of course he showed up. Of course he tried to act like nothing had happened. And of course, for one horrifying second, she felt that old tug, the reflex to smooth things over to keep the peace. But then something inside her snapped, and the words spilled out like venom. We are not friends. Stay out of my life. She meant every syllable. Katy dropped onto the edge of the bed, pressing her palms to her knees. 10 years ago, she would have laughed it off, let Jeff charm his way back into her orbit. 10 years ago, she would have ignored the knot in her stomach and told herself Brandon was overreacting. But tonight she saw it clearly. Jeff wasn't a friend. He was a habit, a bad one. And habits only break when you stop feeding them. Her phone buzzed. Claire, because of course. Claire, how's the dinner? Meet anyone cute? Katy stared at the screen, then typed, define, cute. Claire. Tall, broad shoulders, quiet confidence. Looks like he could fix your Wi-Fi and your life at the same time. Katy laughed despite herself. So, Brandon. Claire, wait. He's there. Spill everything. Katy hesitated, thumbs hovering. What was there to spill? They'd exchanged pleasantries. He'd smiled, polite, distant. And then Jeff barged in, and Brandon walked away without a word. She typed, we talked. Briefly. He left when Jeff showed up. Claire, ouch. Old wounds? Katy stared at the blinking cursor. Maybe. Or maybe he just doesn't care anymore. Claire's reply was instant. Or maybe he cares too much. Guys don't walk away from drama unless they've learned the hard way. Katy set the phone down, her chest tightening. Was that true? Did Brandon still care? Or was he just allergic to chaos now, and who could blame him? She thought about the look on his face when Jeff appeared. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. Like someone who'd seen this movie before and didn't want a sequel. Katy lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She hated that she cared what he thought. She hated that seeing him stirred something warm and sharp all at once. And she hated that part of her wanted a chance to fix what she broke, even if it was 10 years too late. Brandon nursed a whiskey at the hotel bar, watching ice cubes swirl like tiny lifeboats. He wasn't mad. He kept telling himself that. He wasn't mad at Katy, wasn't mad at Jeff. He was just done. Except, if he was truly done, why did his chest tighten when he saw Jeff's arm around her? Why did he feel that old sting? The one that whispered, you'll never be her first choice. He drained the glass and signaled for another. The bartender slid it over without a word. Brandon stared at the amber liquid, wondering why he even came tonight. Nostalgia? Closure? Or maybe some foolish hope that the past could stay buried. The truth was, seeing Katy didn't hurt like it used to, but it didn't feel neutral either. Felt unfinished. Katy couldn't sleep. She tossed, turned, and finally gave up, padding to the window in her bare feet. The city lights glittered like 1,000 secrets. Somewhere out there, Brandon was probably asleep, or maybe not. Maybe he was sitting at the bar, brooding over whiskey like he used to brood over code. She laughed softly at the thought. Then her smile faded. Tomorrow was the ceremony. Tomorrow they'd sit through vows and speeches and pretend everything was fine. But tonight, Katy made herself a promise. No more old patterns. No more silence. If she got the chance, she'd talk to Brandon, really talk. Not about Jeff, not about college. About now. About who they'd become. Because maybe, just maybe, fate wasn't done with them yet. Chapter 6. Drinks and Confessions. Brandon wasn't sure why he ended up at the hotel bar again. Maybe because whiskey didn't ask questions. Maybe because the hum of conversation was easier than the silence of his room. He claimed a stool at the far end, ordered a double, and tried not to think about the fact that he'd spent half the evening avoiding someone he used to know better than anyone. The bartender slid the glass over. Brandon took a slow sip, letting the burn settle in his chest. He was halfway through his second drink when a voice broke through the low buzz of chatter. "Is this seat taken?" He turned, and there she was, Katy. Black dress, loose waves framing her face, eyes steady but cautious. For a second, Brandon forgot how words worked. No," he said, gesturing to the empty stool. "Go ahead." She slid onto the seat, setting her clutch on the bar. "Figured I'd find you here," she said lightly. "You always did like quiet corners." Brandon smirked. "And you always did like proving me wrong." Her laugh was soft, familiar. "Touché." The bartender appeared, and Katy ordered a glass of red wine. When he left, silence stretched between them. Not awkward, exactly, but heavy with things unsaid. Brandon broke it first. "So, rough night." Katy's lips curved wryly. "You could say that." Jeff showed up. "I noticed," Brandon said, his tone even. "You handled it." Her brows lifted. "You saw that." "Hard to miss," he said, swirling his whiskey. "You were impressive." Katy blinked, then laughed. A short, surprised sound. "Impressive?" "I basically told him to go to hell in front of half the wedding party." "Yeah," Brandon said, meeting her gaze. "And 10 years ago, you wouldn't have." Her smile faltered, just a fraction. "You're right. I wouldn't have." The bartender returned with her wine. Katy took a sip, then set the glass down carefully. "Brandon," she began, her voice quieter now, "I owe you an apology." He didn't flinch, but his grip on the glass tightened. "For what?" "For college," she said simply. "For everything. I didn't see what I was doing back then. I thought Jeff was just a friend. I thought you understood. But I was wrong." Brandon stared at the amber liquid, then looked up. His eyes were calm, but there was weight behind them. "I wasn't angry, Katy. Not then. Not now." "I know," she said. "That's what made it worse. You didn't yell. You didn't fight. You just walked away." Brandon shrugged lightly. "What was there to fight for? You'd already made your choice." Her throat tightened. "I didn't mean to choose him over you." "Intent doesn't change impact," Brandon said, his tone gentle but firm. "I spent months hoping you'd see me. And every time Jeff called, you proved I wasn't your first pick." Katy swallowed hard. "You're right, and I hate that it took me years to understand." Brandon leaned back, studying her. "What changed?" She smiled faintly. "Life, mistakes, losing people who didn't deserve to be lost." Her gaze held his. "I learned that boundaries matter, that respect matters, and that if someone's in your life, they should never have to wonder where they stand." Brandon's chest tightened. Not with anger, but something else. Something he didn't want to name. "Sounds like you figured it out." "Eventually," she said, her voice soft. "Too late for us, though." He didn't answer right away. He took another sip, letting the silence speak for him. Then slowly he said, "Maybe, or maybe not." Katy blinked. "What does that mean?" Brandon's lips curved into a faint smile. "It means I'm not sure history has to repeat itself." Her breath caught. For a moment, the noise of the bar faded. The clink of glasses, the hum of conversation, all drowned out by the weight of his words. Katy smiled then, small but real. "You know," she said, tilting her head, "you're still terrible at small talk." Brandon chuckled. "And you're still good at calling me out." Their eyes met, and something shifted. Subtle, electric, undeniable. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but maybe the first spark of something new. Chapter 7. The wedding ceremony. Brandon Greer had never seen so many flowers in his life. Roses, lilies, hydrangeas. Every surface of the hotel ballroom looked like it had been attacked by a botanical army. He adjusted his tie for the 5th time and muttered under his breath, "This is what happens when two people with Pinterest boards get married." Ryan, standing beside him, grinned. "You look good, man. Almost like you belong in a wedding magazine." Brandon shot him a look. "If the magazine is called Awkward Groomsman Weekly, sure." Ryan laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "Relax. It's a ceremony, not a firing squad." Brandon scanned the rows of chairs filling up fast. Guests were settling in, chatting, snapping selfies. He spotted Katy near the front, her black dress replaced by a soft blush number that made his brain short-circuit for a second. She looked radiant, calm, like someone who belonged in this picture-perfect scene. He forced himself to look away before Ryan noticed and started narrating his thoughts like a sports commentator. The music shifted, soft strings, the universal signal that things were about to get serious. Brandon slid into his seat, second row, and tried to focus on anything other than the woman 2 chairs away. The ceremony started smoothly, vows, laughter, a few happy tears. Brandon even cracked a smile when the officiant made a joke about the couple surviving group projects in college without killing each other. Then came the ring bearer. A toddler in a miniature tuxedo toddled down the aisle, clutching the ring pillow like it was a life raft. Halfway through, he froze, stared at the crowd, and promptly decided this was his moment to shine. "And oh," he shouted, flinging the pillow like a frisbee. Rings flew in opposite directions, one skittering under a chair, the other landing near Brandon's shoe. Brandon bent down, grabbed the rogue ring, and held it up like a trophy. The crowd erupted in laughter. Katy turned, eyes sparkling, and whispered, "Hero status achieved." Brandon smirked. "I live to serve." The officiant recovered, the rings were reunited, and the vows resumed. Brandon tried to focus, but Katy's smile lingered like a warm echo. The couple sealed the deal with a kiss, and applause thundered through the room. Brandon clapped, genuinely happy for them, but his gaze drifted, just for a second, to Katy. She was already looking at him. Their eyes locked, and something passed between them. Unspoken, undeniable. Not nostalgia, not regret. Something new. Something that made Brandon's chest tighten and his pulse trip over itself. He looked away first because that's what he did. But the weight of that glance stayed with him all the way to the reception hall. The reception was a blur of music, laughter, and champagne. Brandon stuck close to Ryan, determined to avoid drama. But drama had other plans. Jeff appeared like a bad plot twist, sliding up to Katy with a grin that made Brandon want to order another whiskey. Maybe 3. "Dance with me," Jeff said, already reaching for her hand. Katy stepped back, her voice cool as ice. "No," Jeff blinked. "Come on, it's just a dance." "No," she repeated, sharper now. "You don't get to rewrite history with a waltz." Brandon watched from across the room, jaw tight. He wasn't going to intervene. Katy didn't need rescuing. She was handling it. And when Jeff finally slunk away, ego bruised, Brandon felt something unexpected. Pride. Chapter 8. Dance floor diplomacy. The reception was in full swing. Music pulsing, champagne flowing, and guests crowding the dance floor like they'd all forgotten they had knees. Brandon lingered near the edge, nursing a drink and silently judging the DJ's playlist. "Seriously?" he muttered as Cha-Cha Slide blared through the speakers. "This song should come with a warning label." Ryan elbowed him. "Come on, man. Live a little." "I'm living," Brandon said, gesturing to his whiskey. "This is peak living." Ryan rolled his eyes. "You're impossible." Brandon smirked, but his attention drifted, again, to Katy. She was laughing with a group near the dessert table, her blush dress catching the light like it had a personal spotlight. He told himself to look away, but his eyes didn't get the memo. Then she started walking toward him. Brandon straightened, pulse kicking up like a rookie drummer. Katy stopped in front of him, hands on her hips, eyes sparkling with mischief. "Dance with me," she said. Brandon blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said, tilting her head. "Dance. Floor. Now." He stared at her like she just suggested skydiving without a parachute. "Katy, the last time I danced in public, someone called 911 because they thought I was having a seizure." She laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made his chest tighten. "Then tonight's your redemption arc." Brandon hesitated. "I don't know." "Brandon," she said, leaning in just enough for him to catch the faint scent of her perfume. Something soft like vanilla and rain. Just one song. No pressure. No expectations. Just fun. He swallowed hard. "You're persuasive." "I'm persistent," she corrected, holding out her hand. "Come on." Brandon stared at her hand for a beat, then took it. Her fingers were warm, steady, and the contact sent a jolt through him he didn't want to analyze. The song shifted to something slow, classic, romantic, the kind that made people sway like they were floating. Brandon groaned softly. "Of course." Katy smiled. "Relax. Just follow my lead." "Pretty sure that's not how this works," he said, sliding an arm around her waist. She rested her hand on his shoulder, and suddenly the noise faded. The music, the chatter, everything. It was just her, just him, and the steady rhythm pulling them closer. "You're not terrible," she teased after a moment. "High praise," he said dryly. "I'll put that on my resume." She laughed, and he felt it, soft against his chest, warm like sunlight. For a second, Brandon let himself forget the past, forget the years, forget everything except the way her eyes held his like they were searching for something. "You know," Katy said quietly, "I used to imagine this." Brandon's breath caught. "Imagine what?" Dancing with you, she said, her voice barely above the music. Back then. He stared at her, words stuck in his throat. Finally, he managed, and now. Her smile was small, but it reached her eyes. Now I'm glad I didn't wait. Brandon's chest tightened, not with regret, but something sharper. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Of course, that's when Jeff appeared. Seriously, Brandon muttered as Jeff swaggered toward them like a bad sequel. Mind if I cut in? Jeff said, grinning like he owned the room. Yes, Katy said flatly, not even looking at him. I mind. Jeff blinked, thrown off by her tone. Katy, walk away, Jeff, she said, her voice calm but lethal. Before you embarrass yourself. Jeff hesitated, then slunk off, muttering something about champagne. Brandon watched him go, then looked at Katy. Remind me never to get on your bad side, he said. She smiled, eyes locking with his. Then don't. The song ended, but neither of them moved. For a moment the world felt suspended, like maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something worth waiting for. Chapter 9. Late-night conversations. The reception had wound down to a lazy hum. Half-empty champagne flutes, wilted centerpieces, and a DJ who looked ready to fake a power outage. Brandon slipped out onto the terrace, craving fresh air and silence. The night was cool, the city lights glittering like spilled diamonds across the horizon. He leaned against the railing, loosening his tie. For the first time all evening, he felt his shoulders unclench. No Jeff, no crowd, just quiet, until the door creaked open. Brandon turned, and there she was, Katy. Her blush dress shimmered under the soft glow of the terrace lights, and for a second, Brandon forgot how breathing worked. Mind if I join you? She asked, voice low, almost tentative. Brandon gestured to the empty space beside him. It's a free terrace. She smiled faintly and stepped out, heels clicking softly against the stone. For a moment, they just stood there, side by side, watching the city stretch out like an endless story. Needed a break? Brandon asked. Needed a reality check, Katy said, exhaling. Too many people. Too many conversations that start with, so what have you been up to? Brandon smirked. The universal small talk trap. Exactly, she said, turning to face him. So, what have you been up to? He chuckled. Walked right into that one. I couldn't resist, she said, her eyes warm with amusement. Seriously, though, tell me. Brandon hesitated, then shrugged. Work, friends. A lot of grilling on weekends. Nothing dramatic. Sounds peaceful, Katy said softly. I envy that. He glanced at her. You've had drama? She laughed without humor. More than I care to admit, but I've learned to cut it out. People, habits, all of it. Brandon studied her profile, the curve of her jaw, the steadiness in her eyes. You seem different, he said quietly. In a good way. Katy met his gaze. I had to be. The old me. She didn't know how to value the right things. Brandon's chest tightened. You mean us? Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. Yes, she said simply. I didn't see what I had until it was gone. Silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. The kind that feels like a bridge instead of a wall. Brandon swallowed hard. I wasn't perfect either, he said. I should have said something sooner. Told you how much it bothered me. You did, Katy said softly. I just didn't listen. Their eyes locked, and the world narrowed to that single point of connection. The hum of traffic below, the distant laughter inside. It all faded until there was nothing but the quiet thrum of possibility. Brandon stepped closer, just enough for her perfume. Soft, warm, like rain on summer pavement, to curl around him. Katy tilted her head, lips parting slightly, and for one breathless second, the universe held its breath. Then the door banged open. Hey, you too. Ryan's voice crashed through the moment like a cymbal. Come on, they're doing the bouquet toss. Brandon closed his eyes, muttering something that sounded suspiciously like a prayer for patience. Katy laughed, a low, rueful sound, and shook her head. Saved by tradition, she said, her smile tinged with something else. Something that promised this wasn't over. Brandon offered his arm. Shall we? She slipped her hand through his, and as they walked back inside, Brandon felt it. The spark, the pull, the undeniable truth. History wasn't repeating itself. It was rewriting. Chapter 10. The morning after, sunlight spilled through the hotel curtains like an uninvited guest, warm and relentless. Katy groaned, pulling the pillow over her head. Her feet ached from dancing, her throat was dry from laughing, and her brain, well, her brain was replaying one moment on a loop. The terrace. Brandon's eyes. That breathless second before Ryan barged in like a human plot twist. Katy sat up slowly, hair tumbling over her shoulders. She padded to the window, tugging the curtain aside. The city stretched out in shades of gold and gray, calm and indifferent to the chaos in her chest. She wasn't a teenager anymore. She didn't believe in fate or cosmic signs. But last night felt like something worth fighting for. And for once, she wasn't going to let fear or pride get in the way. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She grabbed it, expecting Claire's morning gossip texts. Instead, the name on the screen made her stomach drop. Jeff, of course. She stared at the message. Breakfast? Just us. We need to talk. Katy laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. We need to talk. The universal prelude to nonsense. She typed back one word. No. Seconds later, the phone rang. She answered because ignoring him would only prolong the circus. Jeff, she said flatly. Katy, come on. His voice oozed charm. The same brand of confidence that used to make her cave. Last night was tense. Let's clear the air. There's nothing to clear, she said, pacing the room. You don't get to waltz back into my life like you own a backstage pass. Jeff chuckled, like this was all a game. You're still mad. I get it. But we were good together. No, Katy snapped, her voice slicing through his. We weren't. You were good at taking and I was good at letting you. That's over. Silence. Then, softer. Is this about him? Katy froze. Excuse me? Brandon, Jeff said, his tone dripping with smugness. You think he's different? He walked away once. He'll do it again. Katy's grip tightened on the phone. You know what, Jeff? Maybe he will. But at least he knows how to respect someone. Which is more than I can say for you. She hung up before he could reply, her pulse thrumming like a war drum. For the first time in years, she felt free. No guilt. No second-guessing. Just clarity. Katy dressed quickly. Jeans, a soft sweater, boots that meant business. She checked her reflection, smoothed her hair, and grabbed her bag. There was a brunch downstairs, a crowd waiting, and somewhere among them, Brandon. She wasn't going to wait for fate this time. She was going to find him, and she was going to say what needed to be said, even if her voice shook, even if her heart tried to sprint out of her chest, because history wasn't going to write this ending. She was. Chapter 11. The goodbye that isn't. Brandon zipped his suitcase with a quiet finality that felt heavier than it should. The weekend had been complicated. Good in some ways, unexpected in others. But now it was over. Time to go back to his quiet life, his predictable routines, his safe little bubble where feelings didn't sneak up and sucker punch him. He glanced around the hotel room. Neat, impersonal, already stripped of anything that said you were here. Just like he liked it. No mess. No drama. Except for the one thing he couldn't pack away. Katy. Brandon exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. He told himself he wouldn't get pulled back in. He told himself history didn't need a sequel. And yet, last night on that terrace, with her eyes locked on his and the air thick with everything unsaid, he'd almost kissed her. Almost. He shook his head, grabbed his bag, and checked the time. If he left now, he could skip the brunch circus and hit the road before anyone noticed. He was halfway to the door when a knock stopped him cold. Brandon froze. For one irrational second, he considered pretending he wasn't there. But then the knock came again, soft, steady, like whoever was on the other side wasn't leaving. He opened the door, and there she was. Katy stood in the hallway, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes bright but nervous. She wore jeans and a pale sweater, simple and perfect, and Brandon felt his pulse trip over itself. Leaving already? She asked, voice quiet. Yeah, he said, gripping the doorframe like it might anchor him. Figured I'd beat the traffic. She nodded slowly, then took a breath, the kind that sounded like courage. Can I come in? Brandon hesitated, then stepped aside. Sure. She walked in and suddenly the room felt smaller, the air heavier. Brandon set his bag down, waiting, wondering why his chest felt like a drumline. Katy turned to face him, hands twisting together before she stilled them. I didn't want you to leave without hearing this. Brandon's throat tightened. Hearing what? That I'm sorry, she said, her voice steady now. Not just for college, for everything. For not seeing you. For making you feel like you weren't enough. You were. You always were. Brandon stared at her. Words stuck somewhere between his chest and his mouth. Finally, he managed, Katy. She stepped closer, eyes locked on his. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything. But I need you to know. I'm not that girl anymore. And if there's even the smallest chance to start over, I'd take it. Silence stretched, thick and electric. Brandon felt every beat of his heart like a countdown. He'd spent years building walls, convincing himself he was fine without her. And maybe he was. But standing here, looking at her, stronger, steadier, and still the only person who ever made him feel like the ground could shift under his feet, he knew the truth. He didn't want fine. He wanted this. Brandon closed the distance in 2 steps. His hand cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheek like he'd been waiting a decade to do it. Katy's breath hitched, her eyes flickering with something raw and real. Then he kissed her. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't polite. It was everything they'd left unsaid, everything they'd buried, crashing to the surface in one breathless, perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, Katy laughed softly, her forehead resting against his. So, does this mean you're staying for brunch? Brandon grinned, his voice low and certain. I'm staying for more than brunch. Chapter 12. Epilogue. Grilled and thrilled. 6 months later. Brandon Greer stood at his backyard grill, flipping steaks like a man who had finally mastered the art of medium rare. The sun was high, the air smelled like charcoal and summer, and laughter floated across the yard from the cluster of friends lounging with drinks in hand. Ryan raised his beer and called out, "Brandon, these steaks better be worth the hype. You've been bragging for weeks." Brandon smirked. "Bragging? I prefer the term, setting realistic expectations." "Aha," Ryan said, grinning. "If they're dry, we're staging an intervention." Brandon rolled his eyes and turned back to the grill, just as a familiar voice chimed in behind him. "Don't worry," Katy said, sliding up beside him with a plate of veggies. "I've got a backup plan. If the steaks fail, we'll distract everyone with dessert." Brandon glanced at her, and for a second, the world narrowed to that smile, the one that still made his chest tighten like it was the first time. "You doubting my skills?" "Not at all," she said, eyes dancing. "Just being practical. You know, business management and all." He chuckled, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "You're lucky I like practical." "Lucky?" she teased. "Pretty sure you're the lucky one." Brandon grinned. "No argument here." Ryan, of course, couldn't resist. "Look at these two," he announced to the group. "Finally figured it out after, what, a decade? Slow burn much?" Katy laughed, tossing a cherry tomato at him. "Better late than never." Claire raised her glass. To second chances, and to Katy finally dumping Jeff for good. The yard erupted in laughter. Brandon shook his head, muttering, "I'm never living that down." Katy slipped her arm around his waist, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "You don't have to. We wrote a better ending." Brandon looked down at her, sunlight catching in her hair, and felt something settle deep in his chest, a quiet certainty he hadn't known in years. This wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. The steaks turned out perfect, because of course they did. Brandon handed out plates, Katy stole the first bite, and the yard buzzed with easy laughter and clinking glasses. No drama, no ghosts, just good food, good friends, and the woman who'd once been a memory and was now his future. Brandon raised his beer, catching Katy's eye across the table. She smiled, slow and sure, and in that moment, Brandon knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, second chances taste like steak and laughter.